In this video, you learn how to set up 5 common entourage types in your drawings without using any references or pre-made templates. Let's first of all look at how to sketch people. Subdivide your page into 7 increments in lines. You can then simply sketch a head of the person, then 2 lines kind of going towards the middle, so between here and here, and then lastly 2 legs, hands, that are kind of the size of the torso, a little bit longer really, but because we have a bend, we'll finish them at the waist level. We can then do another one. To make it a little bit less cartoony, we can create a new layer. Do the same, so 7 subdivisions, try to make them more or less equally. And then I'm going to show you a couple more postures that you can use. So for example, a very typical person I draw is a man that's walking. So for that, I'll draw the hands and I'll draw the legs very closely together with the line separating the two. We can create a little man that's reaching up. So for that, the head would be tilted up. There will be a little arch in the back, and then we'll have the torso. The leg kind of kicks off like this. That's the back leg that this person is standing. So typically when they stand, you want to have a chin in line with the foot, and then another leg popping out. Just a little bit of thickness, and then the 2 arms from the shoulders kind of swinging up. Then we have another guy that I sometimes like to draw, which is just the kind of standing up guy, so just the same as here, but this time we'll have the legs a little bit more further apart and the arms in a bit more kind of loose way. And then finally we'll do a couple more figures. One is the walkie figure, so just as before. Then we'll have the first leg kind of moving forwards, so the 2 lines converge in a kind of triangle, and then the back leg with a slight bend at the knee can be behind. And say this guy is holding his arms in the pocket, so we can show one arm and the second one is kind of tucked away behind. Can also have even more kind of sideways movement, but this time we'll catch this person in a moment where they're standing on their leg, and then as we did before, the leg kind of gets thicker towards the waist, and we can draw another leg just kicking from behind of this front leg, and bend in the arm that's closest to us, and the one that's further away bends in the opposite way. I use these curvy lines to just make the drawing a bit more clear. I typically, when it comes to these people, don't really reinvent that many poses. Okay, the second type of most common entourage is the tree. As a principle, you kind of want to use what's called like a bubble approach to drawing a tree. Usually 3 bubbles representing the branches or the clusters of branches, and then simply from each of these you pull line down. All of them converge into a single stem, and then the stem projects down to the earth and you draw a ground line. Now, a bit more fancy version of the same approach is to use a kind of straight lines to make like octagonal shapes. If we want to have it a bit more realistically, I can start drawing a couple of extra lines so I can understand the direction of the sun. These areas here would be in the shadow. So again, I'll create yet another layer on top. And of course, once you practice this a couple of times, you won't have to create layers over. And what I want to do is I want to kind of start drawing over the tree. And the principle behind the line that goes around the trees is very simple. You basically do this kind of motion sideways, like so. But you can see here that this is not very tree-like form. So what I do instead is every so often I'll do the sideways, but I also will pull down. So essentially, rather than moving sideways, side to side, I move sideways, but I occasionally move up and down as well with my line. And also what I like to do is I like to introduce these breaks, because breaks give a little bit of vagueness to the drawing, gives that little bit of sense of realism. Okay, so once the contour is done, just kind of roughly following the edge of the shadow, then I can introduce a bit more lines where the shadow is, and depending how much time and effort I want to do, I might even add more subdivisions. Next up, we have vehicles. Vehicles are kind of a tricky one. The way I overcome the problem of the vehicles is I try to focus on the main proportions. If I start with the elevation, I usually draw a kind of rectangle, elongated rectangle, and I'll draw 2 wheels. And roughly the proportion should be as follows. You have a wheel here, and then you have probably like 3 wheels worth of width, and then half a wheel at the back. Now what you do, so this is the first half. We add another line at the very top, which would be the roof, which is the half. And then what I do is I simply kind of pull the roof toward the wheel. Ideally, my roof actually would be ending over the center of the wheel. And then over here, I kind of want to project this line towards the opposite corner of this rectangle. And then the very last but very important bit is I want to kind of like a shelf here. I want to kind of like a extrusion upwards that's slanted. And just to show this car from another point of view and just to illustrate a little bit better what I mean is I'm going to draw another rectangle, just the front of the car this time. And then this slanty bit at the top, just as before, the roof, and then lines converging towards that roof. I can put indicative kind of headlights. If we want to do this in perspective, we do exactly what you can see here, but in a kind of turned way. So the first line is kind of always slanting this way, depending on how much of the car you see. I then draw horizontal, so I just drew these two lines there, and then going to the opposite direction are the front of the car lines. Put the wheels on, which are simple ellipses, and then I can draw this kind of as I call shelfy bit, and then I can draw my windshield and the top of the car, which would be just underneath the eye level. And I can do the same with maybe seeing a little bit more of the side of the car. So just as we did before, we'll draw the side and then two wheels, and then because we see more of the side, we'll see less of a front, so the front bit will be smaller. And then as before, I draw this little shelf, and finally the windshield and the roof, like so. Obviously this looks a little bit boxy. I could leave it as it is, depending on what kind of sketch I do, but I might also sometimes add just a little bit more character to it, a little bit more slanty lines. Next up we have bicycles, but I always only do them sideways, and I'll start with drawing the back wheel. Once I have the back wheel, I'll draw a line from the center of that wheel towards the right side, and then draw a little triangle like so, which would be the back of the wheel, but also my seat. It will be projected up the frame, and then kind of another line going from the center point upwards, and where the frame meets the line that goes upwards, we have another line for the fork. I'm trying to replicate the size of the first circle, and we draw the front wheel. And then finally, slightly lower than the edge of the seat, we draw our steering wheel, so projecting again that way and then downwards. Can then add a little bit of thickness to this in this first pass, bigger circles for the chain, and then I'll leave the pedals out for now. And then I might put a person on this. The back arching forwards is the first step. You typically have a leg again sprouting in a kind of downwards direction at an angle and going like this. This part of the leg kind of goes down towards the steering wheel, and then the other part of the leg goes downwards towards the pedal. This is where our pedal is going to be. And just like before with people, I want to start with thin leg that kind of gradually becomes thicker at the top like this. And then what the opposite leg usually does is kind of goes in a straight line behind. It gets a bit messy here, but I'm just gonna make that leg a bit thicker and more pronounced, and that opposite leg meets the pedal at the back. And then finally what we can do, we can draw another line like so to show where the shoulder meets the arm, and then a circle for the head. And as before, I can do another pass over this just to tidy this drawing up. And then lastly, let's look at how to draw a bench. Now, it makes sense to practice drawing it occasionally, I think, just to keep your sketching skills sharp. So I typically start with axonometric boxes, depending on the viewpoint. If I'm looking from above, or if it's more in a perspective, it kind of follows slightly less exaggerated path. So I'll typically see two sides and then very little at the top, and just another one, axonometric view, maybe pointing that way. Now once that's done, I can then put my back in. I'll slant it a little bit towards the kind of back, so it's tilted that way on all three of these. Maybe I'll draw the back on this side in this view. I'm keeping my lines loose. The second thing I want to do is I want to kick back the leg again on all three of them at the same time. And then the forward leg will probably stay straight up like so, but the seat is going to be slanting upwards as well towards the front of the bench, just so that we achieve more ergonomic feature. By the way, this is the same approach can be applied to a chair. Obviously the chair would be much less wide. And once we have that, we can also put an armrest, which I think will extend from this leg up and then just simply towards the back supports parallel to the seat underneath. And then we can create another layer on top, reduce the opacity of one underneath, and just add thickness to these. And you can see here I'm simply projecting a wooden timber piece, which essentially just simply follows the same rules as any other box. It's just much more elongated and narrow. The same with the backrest, showing 2 lines for the thickness, following the construction lines that I have previously set up. Same for this bottom bit. So this is the thickness for the bench. I can add a 3rd line just as a kind of support underneath, and do the same with these other ones. If you enjoyed this video, then why not check other videos on my channel? I release content weekly, and my goal is to help architects to draw better using digital tools, saving time and have more fun doing it. And if you don't want to miss out on any future videos, then subscribe to my newsletter in the link below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next time, bye bye.